Hey there, this is Natalie, and I'm talking in my late night radio DJ voice because tonight we're going to be talking about love. At least, we're going to be talking about love triangles. That's right, listeners. This is a video about relationship dramas, heartache, and most importantly, about Rem. I wanted to take a smooth, long look at sweet, sweet Rem, and where I think Tappei might go with her character development, why I think Rem is in the story to begin with, and the love triangle between Rem, Subaru and Emilia, in terms of why I think that's there, and what Tappei might be doing with it. This is the first of a pair of videos about Rem, and this one is going to be safe for all you sweet, sweet anime onlys. So this one only takes into account stuff that's happened up to halfway through Arc 4, where I'm making this video in the gap between the first and second cours of Season 2. It focuses on Rem and her relationships. The second video will be more about Rem's character development, particularly around her inferiority complex, and that will take into account some stuff from Arc 6 and predictions around what might happen in the next arc, including discussion of a very interesting idea one of my sweet, sweet listeners, Jack Baracha, brought up in the comments to another one of my Arc 6 videos. So, if you're a web novel reader, look out for that one to follow up on this video. But if you're anime only, then you can watch this one about Rem from the romance perspective without any fear of spoilers. Now, one thing I think is worth mentioning about Rem, just to keep in mind through all of this, though it isn't really key to the character development and romance stuff I'll mainly be talking about here, is that there is some general suspicion about her overall existence. A popular theory with fans is that Ram should actually have been an only child, fulfilling her expected destiny of being the reincarnation of the only god, having both of her horns, and generally being completely OP. I'm making a series of videos summarising the story of the Oni Sisters of the Hidden Village prequel side novel. Part 1 of that is already up if you're interested in more Rem and Ram content, and in that, as well as in the flashback we saw in Season 1 to their childhood, and the general relationship between Rem and Ram prior to Rem being eaten, we definitely get the impression that Rem's existence is the most important thing to Ram, and that she would be quite a different person if she didn't have her sweet, sweet twin. Not in the way that we see her become a little bit different when she loses her memories of Rem, becoming more devoted to Roswell. I mean in the way we see child Ram, before she lost her horn, who's the most powerful Oni in a millennium and revered by the Oni clan. If Ram was supposed to be an only child, an only Oni, and not only had both of her horns, but didn't have the stabilizing influence on her life of a twin she adored, then Ram would probably have been, basically, the all-powerful, battle-hungry leader the Oni wanted. A lot of people suspect that in an attempt to stop the Oni, who were already in decline, from gaining that person, someone, probably a character we'll see later in Season 2, who I won't talk about too much here because this is an anime-only video, caused something weird to go on while their mother Tappei was pregnant, causing Rem to exist and Ram to be a twin. This would normally have meant that the twins would have been killed at birth, which would have basically gotten rid of the Oni god while she was just a newborn. This didn't work because Ram was able to demonstrate her incredible power even as a baby, stopping the village elder from killing herself and Rem, seemingly because she wanted to protect her sister, even in her first minutes of life. So the person who was responsible for tampering with the baby Oni in the first place would have needed a second plan to get rid of the Oni god, hence the witch cult attack on the village. Ram lost her horn as a result of this, and while the twins did survive and were taken into Roswell's protection, Ram no longer has the ability to use her full powers, and the Oni she was intended to lead are all dead, so any potential threat from the Oni was mitigated, if not gone forever. this theory is definitely a good one, and one I think has a high chance of being right, or at least close to right. But whether it is or not, the way I see it, this would really be more important to Rem's development in the story. Something that, if you're anime only, she hasn't had a huge amount of yet, but will definitely be getting. Yes, finding out that she was never supposed to exist would have an effect on Rem, and if this theory turns out to be true, there could be all kinds of crazy stuff Tappei could do with how all of this will affect the plot, which will hopefully be something to look forward to. But I think that stuff will be secondary in importance, as far as Rem's character development and function in the smooth story of ReZero go, to Rem's relationship with Subaru. To me, there are two important things with Rem that are going to play an important part in the story that we already know about, and those are her general inferiority complex, which I'll be talking about more in the second video, and her devotion to Subaru, which is what I'm going to be focusing on here, in the context of what I think Tappei might be trying to do with general popular love triangle and harem tropes, to say something about how those tropes are usually handled. Yes, I'm probably going to end up saying the word deconstruction at some point in this video. This is my 91st video, and I don't think I've ever actually said anything about deconstruction and ReZero before, so I guess I've had a good run. But what have we seen so far of this complicated romance plot to base all of the analysis and predictions I have for you about Rem on? Rem developing a really intense love for Subaru, which she confessed in Arc 3, but which began to develop in Arc 2, is something that's already had a big impact on her, and on Subaru. And I think, potentially, that it could also turn out to be very important in Emilia's story, but we'll get to that. From her own perspective, Rem confessed her love to Subaru as a way to motivate him when he was losing his marbles, for reasons that made complete sense to us, but probably required a lot of trust and understanding from Rem, who didn't see most of the things that actually drove Subaru to the edge of insanity. If Rem was a selfish character who believed she was entitled to be with Subaru and didn't care at what cost, Rem could have taken advantage of how he was feeling and simply agreed to his proposal that they run away together, which is what happens in the Rem-if side novel, also known as the Sloth-if. The Sloth-if is an unusual thing, because where the if roots usually show what would happen if Subaru made a different choice. For instance, if he'd contracted with Echidna, we get the greed if. If he'd never called for help and met Reinhard on his first day in the ReZero world, we get the pride if, and so on. In the Sloth if, it would actually be Rem making a different choice that would kick off the story. Subaru did offer her this life together in Kararagi, at the cost of ignoring everything that was happening with the whale and petal juice, and basically allowing a lot of people, including Emilia, to die. But Rem could see that he wouldn't be the Subaru she loved if he would let that happen, and so instead of taking the chance to have the future she'd been dreaming of with him, she uses her love for him to strengthen him so he can carry on. The Rem-if is literally Rem's if route, not the route for Subaru if he chose her instead of Emilia in that moment, but the route for Rem if she'd been slothful and taken the easy option to get what she wanted. Subaru would have known deep down that he couldn't really just ignore everything and run away, at least not to live a long and happy life, given that he's seen that if Emilia dies, Puck freezes everything. But he's in a desperate mental state. Rem doesn't know about any of that, so it is possible for her to actually imagine what that life might be like, and yet she can also tell that what Subaru really needs is a push, and so she gives it to him. Rem accepts that Subaru loves Emilia gracefully here, unlike some of us in the ReZero fan community, and it doesn't change how much she's willing to do to support him. This does look pretty selfless, but it's another indication of Rem's inferiority complex. Even Petra, who's a little peasant kid, doesn't want to lose to Emilia when it comes to winning the prize that is our boy Subaru. And yet, Rem seems to be kind of expecting that she will be no competition for basically anyone else Subaru might want. And she's fine with just being in the background, being supportive, willing to sacrifice everything, including her own life, for someone who's literally told her she isn't their number one. Rem is comfortable with that, because she's always seen herself as the substitute anyway, even though many years have passed since Ram lost her horn, and Rem is now, as far as anyone like Subaru or Emilia who met them recently can see, the stronger and more useful of the twins. Rem's devotion to Subaru helps Subaru in that moment, and even the memory of it continues to help him at times we see in Arc 4, such as during the trial of the past, when Subaru hears both Emilia and Rem in his mind, reminding him that he's got a purpose now that he didn't have the last time he saw his dad. It's even used by Echidna, who sends Carmilla disguised as Rem to comfort him when his mind is broken by the trial of the present, something Subaru sees through and is greatly angered by, though this wasn't made such a big deal of in the anime, because that episode 12 of Season 2, really packed in a lot of stuff that probably could have done with a bit more breathing space. But we already start to see the downsides of the combination of Rem's general self-sacrificing sense of inferiority and her devotion to Subaru when she encounters Leibat and Kaitos. Now, I'm not saying this would have ended better if Rem hadn't given her speech about her hero. More likely than not, if Lei hadn't taken an interest in her because of this, she would have just been killed by Regulus. Anime-onlys won't have seen how dangerous the smooth Sin Archbishop of Greed Regulus Cornelius is yet, and I won't spoil anything from the plot about that. But to give you an idea from something Tappei said, he said that Regulus is the strongest of all of the witches in Echidna's Dream Citadel and the Sin Archbishops, and that if they were all to have a fight, Regulus would be the last one standing, and it would only take a minute. Rem is badass with her Morning Star, and she has Krush and some soldiers on her side, but if Regulus decided to kill her, she would be dead. So I'm not saying that if Rem didn't love Subaru to the point of needing to do a little monologue about it to her enemy before fighting, she'd have been entirely better off here, but it was that speech that made Lei interested in her and her memories. He wanted to know who this hero she spoke of was, and so he ate Rem to find out, and now he knows all about Subaru. Meanwhile, Subaru realizes that he can't ignore how Rem feels about him, and how much what she did for him means to him, and he has this sense of unease that he's basically in love with two girls. He tries to talk to Emilia about this, but they're both pretty inept at talking about this kind of stuff due to their inexperience, and so it remains fairly unresolved. Emilia doesn't quite return Subaru's feelings anyway, but for reasons that will become clear in the second cour of Season 2, that's not really because she doesn't want him around or is outright rejecting him. It's more like Emilia just isn't ready for a romance yet. But the feeling is definitely there that when she is, she expects it to be with Subaru. With Rem in a coma and her own feelings undeveloped, Emilia can currently really not worry about what any of this is going to mean, and her kind-hearted nature makes her happy to help Subaru in trying to save Rem. She doesn't remember her, but she sees how important she is to Subaru. But what is never even hinted at is that Emilia would ever be open to a harem-type situation with her in it. Rem, who has always felt like an extra, would be open to being Subaru's sweet side piece, even though it doesn't seem like the healthiest thing for her to want, given that inferiority complex of hers, which is almost certainly something that's going to need to be resolved in the story. Emilia, however, is someone who values promises and contracts and so on more than anything, and who has had only one person she could trust in her life in recent years, in the form of Puck. she's been largely hated and feared rather than ignored like Rem, and so it takes a lot for her to let someone get close to her. And yet when she does, despite her kindness, she would probably feel the need to have the assurance that, like Puck, they would always choose her and be faithful to her. We do see in season 2 in her crazy moments when her mind breaks and she becomes thoroughly dependent on Subaru and acts all yandere, that she's not a fan of sharing him with Rem. And while she's not acting like her usual self here, it does feel like this is an aspect of herself that is there, but which she doesn't normally allow herself to think about. I'm not outright saying the words jealousy or envy here, because we'll come to that later. Now, I think Tappei has set this potential love triangle / harem type thing up very intentionally, because he wants to explore another aspect of the typical isekai tropes in the unique way that he tends to do with ReZero, which is around taking the common tropes and simply making things more realistic. He doesn't tend to subvert things in an ironic way or parody the tropes of isekai. The more deconstructive way he does things is based around lifting the veil of the fantasies and wish fulfillment in a typical isekai story and having them play out more as they would if the people involved were real people. This is at the core of why ReZero is so good. He isn't deconstructing things just to make a point about how cheesy, overpowered protagonists gets a harem in another world stories are. He's deconstructing them by adding the reality that comes from characters acting like real people in a setting that has a proper sense of logic to it, which actually makes the story better, and characters like Subaru a lot more relatable than the blank self-insert protagonists in the usual isekai stories. Those blank characters are written to be as normal and easy to relate to as possible, and yet Subaru, who, despite being normal, is written with his own very well explored personality and character, is actually more effective. By not being afraid to do things with Subaru that make him his own person and not you, he feels a lot more real and easy to empathise with, even for someone like me who has nothing in common with him at all, demographics-wise. And so if he's handling things in this way, in this, well, what would it actually be like if this place and these people were real and this stuff actually happened? Wouldn't a lot of it be way less pleasant than it's written to be in a normal isekai way? Then it's only proper that he would want to apply that approach to the protagonist's relationships. And here, I think he's taking the chance to start doing this, with Subaru realising that he has feelings for Rem as well as Emilia. If the point of Rem's love for Subaru was just to help him get over some hurdles, or even to feed into the character arc of Rem generally feeling like second best in life, then there would be no reason for Subaru to need to be torn between Rem and Emilia at all. He rejects Rem after her confession, Rem takes it just fine, and the story could have continued with that being the state of things between them. Subaru could love Rem platonically and value her a lot, still wanting to save her just as much as he does when he's romantically interested in her. We see him, after all, trying really hard to save Beatrice, despite her not being a love interest, so this wouldn't be at all strange. Subaru could, plot-wise, have remained just as devoted to Emilia, and only Emilia, as he was when he told Rem that was who he loved. Having Subaru realise he does love both Rem and Emilia then was something that didn't need to happen for the story to continue the way it has, or for anybody's motivations to be what they currently are. It was therefore done because it's important to something that will happen later in the story, or because Tappei wants to explore why the classic thing in isekai stories of the hero having multiple beautiful women all in love with him, and the easy solution that he can just be with all of them, which causes no complications for anybody, and which the girls are all naturally just fine with, probably wouldn't be that great of a situation for any of the people involved, including the hero, if everybody acted more like actual people. So, here we have Subaru, who, arriving in this new world, was rescued by Emilia and fell in love with her, for reasons that are probably something deeper than we've even been shown so far. It's kind of mysterious that he falls in love with her straight away, and then doesn't even consider perhaps just stopping pursuing Emilia at all and just helping her as a knight or something, romantically sticking with Rem given Emilia hasn't reciprocated anything, once he begins to feel that way about Rem. What he feels for Emilia is something that it's kind of out of the question for him to go back on. He takes it as his role in life to protect and help Emilia, and he wants to view himself as the kind of loyal person deserving of her trust. He therefore feels like a total scumbag when he finds that after Rem helped him so much and views him the way she does, he loves her too. He's not like the normal isekai protagonist who takes it all in his stride that a woman like Rem would fall in love with him and do anything for him, and immediately finds that his other love interest is fine with it. Instead, he acts like a real person and thinks that the way Rem feels for him and wants to sacrifice herself for him all the time is kind of a big deal that he can't help but be moved by. But also doesn't want to see himself as the kind of man who would have his head turned away from the romance he'd decided for himself just a short time before that he was going to dedicate everything he had to. It's not what he wanted at all, and he doesn't feel like an awesome Chad because of it. He feels like someone who's probably going to have to make some very tough choices later on, and who may well be on a path to hurting one or both of the women he wants to save. He doesn't like being torn between these two, and he doesn't even entertain the idea of getting more deeply involved with other beautiful women in the setting who would certainly be harem candidates if he was that kind of protagonist, like Echidna, Crush, even Petra. Then there's Rem herself. In a normal isekai story, she's the perfect waifu who loves the hero unconditionally and is also a badass who will fight to help him wherever she can. She doesn't even mind that he loves someone else. She'll give everything she has for him and ask for nothing in return. In a normal isekai story, well, that would be just perfect. Best girl, no questions asked. But Tappei's made it all a bit less of a fantasy than that. It's not good for Rem at all to be like this. It's a symptom of the way she views herself as unworthy in general. Her devotion to Subaru is not some angelic gift, even though it seems like it at times. It's a sign that she just doesn't value herself at all, and thinks she only exists to support other people. In a normal isekai, this wouldn't be examined, so it would just be like, well, hey, she's super kind and helpful and the protagonist is nice to her, so it's all fine. She doesn't need to grow in the story. But in ReZero, where it's all handled more like real people, it really feels like the best thing for Rem, in order to complete her own proper character arc, is for her to actually get over this thing of being devoted to anyone, whether it's Subaru or Ram or anybody else. In terms of the whole sins theme in ReZero, Rem needs to find her own pride, instead of being proud of who she's supporting. I think that will happen, and that will be talked about more in the second video about this with the Arc 6 stuff. Finally, there's Emilia, and this is where I think it will start to be apparent that this whole love triangle might well be there for plot reasons, as well as for Tappei to put his own spin on some isekai tropes. Emilia, as I've said, does not seem like the classic isekai princess who, on Subaru suggesting that he loves Rem too and would ideally like to be with both of them, would just say, "Oh, everybody has concubines in this world, Subaru-kun. You can marry everyone, and I won't mind at all, because my character and opinions on things don't matter in this story, so we can just assume I'm fine with everything because I'm nice." But Emilia is nice. Emilia doesn't want to be selfish, and in her innocence, we never really see Emilia succumb to the thematic sins of ReZero at all. More often, Emilia exhibits the virtues, despite being a very flawed character in her own right. Though for anime onlys, a lot of what we can consider about Emilia won't be shown until the second cour, so I won't go into the specifics of her personality flaws and how she views herself in this video. This is, to me, partly because she genuinely is a kind-hearted person who has good intentions, but also, and more crucially, partly because she's innocent and hasn't yet been exposed to a trigger for a sin that's probably going to be important in terms of who she is and what whatever revelations we might get about her later will mean. I am, of course, talking about envy. Yes, I theorised that the plot reason why Tappei had Subaru actually come to return Rem's feelings and kept him torn between the two of them while Rem was sidelined in the story and Emilia and Subaru's relationship made slow progress is because eventually Emilia will be ready to acknowledge to herself and to Subaru that she is romantically in love with him, and when that point in her general growing up is reached, because of the presence of Rem and the fact that she knows Subaru loves Rem, or perhaps even because of something Subaru might do that might make Emilia feel that she's been betrayed in favour of Rem, Emilia will experience intense, unbearable jealousy for the first time. A feeling she, who values being kind and not being selfish, will not know what to do with at all. Whether this will be the catalyst for some big event in the story or not, it's hard to say, but I think Emilia will experience jealousy as a result of the love triangle plotline, and it will be a big deal in some way. Perhaps being timed with some important revelations about what the connection between Emilia and the Witch of Envy has been for all of this time. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Rem's role in the story from the perspective of the romance stuff going on in ReZero. Let me know what you think, and look out for the video about Rem's character development coming soon if you're a web novel reader or don't mind spoilers. Or, if you've already been spoiled about the thing in Arc 6 that I need to mention to talk about that theory, which, well, you'll know if you have. Thank you for listening to this smooth late night ReZero radio show, and I hope to see you again very, very soon.